Let's talk about the framework trade deal that was reached between the U.S. and the EU yesterday. Emmanuel Macron has said that the deal is a dark day for Europe.
I don't know if the exact numbers will be the same that Canada will get, insofar as we are witnessing in Europe a deal that is not good for Europe.
Donald Trump just signed another trade deal, this time with the European Union. It wasn't subtle. A 15% tariff across most goods, hundreds of billions in energy purchases and investment into the U.S. economy, a flashy handshake in Scotland, and not a single mention of Canada. That silence speaks volumes. Canada is the United States' largest trading partner by many measures, but this time it's not being prioritized. And that's not an accident, it's a strategy. For Trump, trade isn't just about economics, it's about optics and leverage. The EU gave him a global headline and billions in buying commitments. Canada doesn't offer that kind of short-term political payoff, so it's pushed aside. That doesn't mean Canada lacks leverage. It supplies 4 million barrels of oil per day to the US. It powers homes with cross-border electricity. It provides critical inputs for American manufacturing, from lumber to auto parts. But here's the problem. Those links are already in place. Canada can't promise more the way Japan or the EU can. It's already embedded in US supply chains. That makes it harder to turn existing value into a new deal that looks impressive on paper. Trump wants deals that are simple to sell. Buy American, pay tariffs, sign here. Canada's reality is more complex and less marketable. In this environment, complexity becomes a disadvantage.
Buy a bunch of stuff from America, and tariffs across the board, 15, 20, 18%, 19% in one case. This is the challenge that partners are facing. This is the challenge that we are facing. I don't believe there is going to be a great deal to be had on the table.
Prime Minister Mark Carney knows this. That's why he's not rushing into anything. In his recent statements, Carney made it clear, Canada will only accept a deal that works long-term, not just to avoid tariffs this week, but to protect its economic structure for the years ahead. Unlike the EU, Canada doesn't need to buy US energy. In fact, it's the exporter. That makes its position fundamentally different. Carney understands that copying the EU framework would be a mismatch, even if it buys short-term relief. Instead, his team is holding the line. They're managing public expectations, preparing for possible tariffs, and quietly aiming for a better opportunity, such as the scheduled USMCA review in 2026. It's a long game, and it's deliberate.
The assurance for Canadian business, for Canadians, is we will only sign a deal that's the right deal, that's a good deal for Canada. We're representing Canada.
Of course, there's pain in the short term. Canada's auto, steel, aluminum, and lumber sectors have taken hits. But the broader economy? So far, it's proving resilient. According to CBC analysis, GDP only fell by 0.1% in April 2025 and may drop another 0.1% in May, far less than early projections. Many Canadian businesses imported goods ahead of tariff deadlines, blunting immediate shocks. And thanks to CUSMA, over 90% of cross-border trade still moves with minimal tariffs. The average effective rate remains around 2.3% for now. That said, the situation is fragile. If the US imposes a 35% blanket tariff on August 1st, as Trump has threatened, the real stress test will begin. But even so, this moment offers clarity. Canada is facing a structural challenge and responding not with panic, but with strategy. In Trump's world, countries line up, sign fast, and pay up. Canada isn't doing that. And it's not because it lacks options, it's because it's choosing not to play that game. Carney's refusal to rush is risky, but it's also calculated. He's betting that protecting national interest, even at the cost of short-term pain, will serve Canada better than folding under pressure. The US may not see Canada as a priority, but that doesn't mean Canada is without power. It just means the path forward is longer and requires patience. Because in this trade war, waiting might be the boldest move of all.
We had a meeting. I wasn't sure. I said 50-50. I think you probably felt the same thing.
Just 1 hour. That's all it took for the President of the United States to go from calling a trade deal with the European Union a 50-50 chance to walking onto a stage and announcing the biggest trade deal ever made. This pattern isn't new.
I think Canada could be one where they'll just pay tariffs, not really a negotiation.
Days before, Trump used the same tactic with Canada, telling reporters there might be no deal at all and that Ottawa might have to just pay tariffs. Then, almost like clockwork, he flipped the script with Europe, moving from doubt to triumph within hours. It's less about negotiation at the table and more about building suspense for a dramatic reveal. From the outside, this might look like strength, but it's also carefully staged. Much of the real bargaining happens behind closed doors, while the public announcements are crafted to create headlines. For countries like Canada, this raises a critical question. If others are signing just to escape tariffs, should Canada resist this pattern and hold out for something more substantial? What Trump calls a deal is often just a framework, broad outlines without binding details. There are no published timelines, no enforcement mechanisms, and no clear terms on what happens if a partner country fails to deliver on its promises. This ambiguity gives Trump the power to redefine the terms at any moment, even after the handshake and the cameras are gone. It's a political advantage, but it leaves trading partners exposed. For Canada, this is both a warning and an opportunity. Instead of rushing to mimic what Japan or Europe accepted, Ottawa could push for stronger, enforceable terms, a real agreement that won't shift with the president's next press conference.
Well, the bottom line is that the American people are going to be paying a 15% tax on any imports from the world's second largest collective economy, and that's the European Union. That is not a good thing for American consumers.
Behind the showmanship, someone has to pay, and that someone is the American consumer. The 15% tariff on EU imports, announced with great fanfare, applies broadly, with limited exceptions for pharmaceuticals. Steel and aluminum imports still face 50% tariffs. For everything else, the price goes up. Businesses that rely on European parts, machinery, or raw materials now face higher costs, which will inevitably flow down to consumers. Whether it's auto components from Germany or specialty foods from Italy, the checkout price in American stores is climbing. The ripple effects go even further. U.S. small businesses that assemble imported goods or use European inputs in manufacturing will be hit the hardest. Unlike multinationals, they have limited ability to absorb cost increases or reconfigure supply chains. For many, this means slowing hiring, cutting hours, or passing costs directly to customers. In a fragile inflationary environment, these hidden taxes could undercut household budgets and business confidence alike. Meanwhile, the much-hyped benefits, like $600 billion in European investments or $750 billion in energy purchases, are vague and spread over years. There's no guarantee how much of that will create jobs or lower prices for ordinary Americans. In the short term, it's a tax disguised as a trade victory. This is where Canada might find leverage. By aligning with U.S. industries that depend on cross-border trade, such as auto manufacturers in Michigan or food processors in Wisconsin, Canada can highlight how tariffs hurt both economies.
We will, obviously, we're working on behalf of Canadians, and we will agree a deal if there's one on the table that is in the best interest of Canadians, just as the United States will do, and we'll use all the time that's necessary. And agree something that's in the interest of Canadians, if that's available.
The urge to sign a quick deal is understandable. No country wants to face 25% or 35% tariffs. But speed is not the same as substance. Trump's pattern of declaring no deal and then staging a victory is powerful media theater. Yet Canada doesn't have to play along. A slower, more deliberate path could secure terms that truly protect Canadian businesses while avoiding the hollow optics that others have settled for. In trade, as in politics, it's not about who signs first, it's about who walks away with something real.
Canada is not open to us. They need to open their market. Unless they're willing to open their market, they're going to pay a tariff.
Of Canada's economy. Of course, the federal government is getting down to the wire in trade negotiations with the U.S.
And Softwood may actually be one of those opportunities for us to strike an early deal with the Americans.
Trade talks between Canada and the United States have entered their most critical stage yet. With President Trump's August 1st deadline fast approaching, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick made it clear, unless Canada opens its market, tariffs will hit. But Ottawa isn't folding. Prime Minister Mark Carney is now meeting with U.S. senators and provincial premiers to find a narrow path forward. A full rollback of tariffs is no longer expected. Instead, Canada is pushing for a limited sector-based deal, one that avoids broad economic damage and restores predictability, even if some tariffs remain.
They want to ensure that they're able to provide high-quality, low-cost building materials for Americans. Also, it's a recognition that in this reality that we're in with this president, we've got to put some things on the table to have conversation.
In the midst of this, one old issue is taking on new significance: softwood lumber. British Columbia has faced U.S. duties on softwood for years. But now, for the first time, Canadian officials, including Premier David Eby, are publicly signaling openness to export quotas as part of a deal. This marks a shift. Quotas were previously off the table. But with over $7 billion in softwood tariffs currently held in escrow and trade talks hanging by a thread, Canadian lumber is being positioned as a strategic bargaining chip, not just a casualty of U.S. protectionism. Why now? Because softwood could offer a rare, quick win. It's a sector with high visibility, cross-border interdependence, and enough political weight on both sides to create leverage, without touching more sensitive industries like dairy or autos.
Look, we got to be honest with ourselves as Canadians, and I think the Carney government has done a good job at this in its sort of early days. This is Trump's strategy, right? Exactly what you just described. That's what his sort of MO has been really in Trump 2.0 administration.
But the game Canada is playing is anything but straightforward. Trump's trade strategy has been deliberately chaotic, shifting deadlines, unclear demands, and threats of full renegotiation of USMCA in 2026. His pattern of destabilization forces other governments to react, not plan. Former New Brunswick Premier Brian Gallant, who once sat at the Premier's table, described Trump's approach as engineered confusion. And Canada, this time, is refusing to be baited. Carney's government isn't matching chaos with chaos. It's choosing discipline, listening to provinces, aligning federal priorities, and pursuing options outside the North American orbit. Canada's response is quiet but coordinated. Ontario defends its auto sector. British Columbia brings softwood to the table. Quebec wants time-bound clarity. Despite differences, premiers are presenting a united front. At the national level, Canada is reinforcing its foundation. Bill C-5 aims to break internal trade barriers. The major projects. Bill prioritizes infrastructure, energy, and mining, especially with Indigenous partnership. Externally, Canada is expanding its reach. From stronger ties with Mexico and the EU to renewed talks with G7 allies, the message is clear. Canada won't rely solely on Washington. Trump may still push forward with tariffs, but the cost is starting to show, not just for Canada, but for the U.S. as well. Softwood lumber duties have already raised construction costs across the U.S., particularly in housing markets dependent on Canadian imports. American lawmakers are under pressure. A bipartisan delegation of senators is now in Ottawa, not to threaten, but to preserve economic stability. And the longer the standoff continues, the more Canadian industries accelerate their pivot away from U.S. dependency. That's the paradox. The harder Trump pushes, the more self-reliant and strategic Canada becomes. This isn't just a trade dispute, it's a stress test for policy, diplomacy, and national cohesion. Softwood lumber might not look like much, but in this moment, it represents something bigger. The ability of a country to hold its ground, make smart concessions, and defend its sovereignty without shouting. Trump's tariffs may yet land, but if they do, the blowback won't just be felt in Ottawa. It'll echo across American construction sites, congressional offices, and investor portfolios. And in the end, it may be Canada's quiet resolve, not Washington's volume, that shapes the deal.